Miami Dolphins had joint practice with the Detroit Lions on Wednesday, and the early reports are not so great. Let me tell you why it might matter, but also why it might not. Here today on Locked On Dolphins.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, NFL staff writer for A to Z Sports. Want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it. You're on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by FanDuel. Football season is right around the corner. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your futures bets now. Dolphins joint practice in Detroit, and the accounts from those in Detroit would have you indicate that it was the greatest practice performance of all time for the Detroit Lions. And from the Dolphins' perspective, a lot of throwaways on offense, some pressure, from a protection standpoint, from a defensive standpoint, was Jared Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown, like NBA Jam style, catching fire, just can't miss. Doesn't matter how good the coverage is. The sky is falling for some. And here's what I would say. In the Hitchhiker's Guide to Wednesday's joint practice reports, I can't guarantee that the Dolphins are going to be good or the Dolphins are not going to be good this year. I don't know. I think if used right and if properly available, the Dolphins have enough talent to have a successful season. But I don't know where this season's going to fall on the spectrum just yet. I'm waiting to see probably till we get to 53 and you look at it and you look across the league and see how things have unfolded and what other investment opportunities you might have to kind of add to your roster. Although it's kind of long shots at that point anyway, right? But maybe you swing a trade. Maybe you sign somebody in free agency. Maybe you pluck somebody off the waiver wire. Like, who knows? I think you could very easily look at the reports, and if you want to have hopium or copium or whatever phrasing you like to use for glass half full, you can find those explanations in what is going on both sides of the ball for this joint practice. Conversely, if you want to think that the glass is half empty and your worst fears are being affirmed, you can find that in this practice as well. It's really hard for me because I wasn't there, right? I did not partake in Wednesday's practice in person. But a couple of things to know. Chop Robinson got banged up. He rode off on the cart, and it's the latest example of preseason and training camp hysteria hitting a team across the league. This time it came for the Dolphins. Chop goes off on a cart, and everybody that's in attendance pulls out their phone, and we text, Chop Robinson goes off on the cart. Chop Robinson carted off at Dolphins practice. And Chop Robinson's season was done, according to Twitter, for about an hour and a half. And Chop gets on Instagram and says, nothing serious, I'm good. But once the practice reports come out, then all the big content aggregators start pulling that, and then it's plastered all over every major media outlet that Chop Robinson was taken off on practice. Meanwhile, I texted somebody who I know from the Detroit side of things who was at practice, and instead of pulling out my phone to tweet it, I texted him. I said, hey, do you any idea what went on with Chop? He said, yeah, it happened right in front of me. Kind of got his arm pulled while he was trying to pull out the ball from David Montgomery. Yelped right away, went down. Looks like it might have been an arm injury, like maybe a hyperextension or something like that. So your thoughts kind of go to, okay, it's like, what's the worst case scenario if it's an arm thing, right? And I reached out to a few more people, and then I got somebody else that was like, yeah, it's an arm. It looks like we're going to be okay. There's no big issues here. And then Chop puts out on Instagram what he puts out saying it's nothing serious. It's all good. And that's the part about this time of year, especially that drives you nuts, is how fast things can go. And I forget who it was, but when somebody else went, it was when Justin Fields went off on the cart, and Justin Fields' season was over, and he had his toe stepped on, and he like dislocated the toe and popped it back in and like practiced the next day. And somebody was like, we need to ban the phrasing of use the cart in training camp because the cart means different things in training camp than what it means for a game. And case in point, the Dolphins, they're in Detroit. It's not their home facility, right? Player gets banged up. You make the player walk 300 yards when they're hurt, regardless of what they've hurt, or you can pull out the cart, you're going to pull them in and take them to go get looked at wherever they need to go. You're going to pull in the cart. It's not a big deal, right? People were thinking lower body extremity injuries for Chop Robinson. Nope. So first and foremost, crisis averted with Chop Robinson. But the training camp from afar culture, this is why I try to give this week, especially, I like how the recording timing has synced out where kind of give myself the day, right? If something happens in the morning, try to give yourself a chance to collect the information before we all sit together and we get together as a community, we talk about it. And sounds like Chop Robinson, you'll be just fine, which is crisis averted because that, if you want to do the glass half empty when we get to the defensive side of the ball and the glass being half empty, that's the fastest way to get there, right? Because Jalen Phillips is not participating in these joints. And then Chop Robinson goes down the first period of team, just like Jaylen Waddle went down on the first period of team against Chicago last week. And it impacts a lot of what you do. And then when you go across the board and it's Bradley Chubb, right? And then it's a rookie in Kenneth Grant or Benito Jones. And then it's Zach Sealer. And then who's your other edge? It's Quentin Bell's the other top edge once you get down to Jalen Phillips not practicing because they want to get through the deep muscle bruise that he has from when he got leg whipped. And then Chop Robinson has whatever happens with Chop Robinson. Do I expect Quentin Bell to win? And Chop had he had 4 pass rush reps in according to those in attendance against Penei Sewell in this practice. And that was it. That was Chop's marquee opportunities in this game. And they said, oh, the Dolphins did get a pressure on Penei Sewell. Yeah. The hopium copium glass half full side of it says, well, Jalen Phillips and Chop Robinson are okay in a real game to be rushing there. And the glass half empty side says, well, you got 2 of your 3 premier edge guys are already banged up. And that's going to be the fun thing to kind of tackle over the rest of the show is looking at the talking points that came out of this practice on either side of the spectrum. But first and foremost, Chop Robinson's good. That's good news. The other thing that was like the central thing for me was, were the Dolphins ready to play physical football today, regardless of how successful it was or not, because practice settings can be about all different kinds of things. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend to know what the Dolphins chose to achieve in practice today. And again, it's not to sit here and make an excuse and say the Dolphins are going to be fine. I don't know that. They might be bad. They might be good. I think the most likely outcome is somewhere in the middle. But if they're bad or good, it's not going to manifest itself on August 13th in a joint practice where the Dolphins have a couple of their guys on ice because they're more ready for getting ready for the start of the season. And, I don't know what the practice itinerary was. Did the Dolphins want to work on new concepts in the passing game? Well, you're doing that with who's available for you at wide receiver. Did the Dolphins want to work on exotics, or did they just want to work basic fundamentals and play vanilla defense? And they're going against Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's one of the best 5 receivers in football. Last year, I said Terry McLaurin was top 15. Somebody got real mad at me on this program. So I hope we don't get into that song and dance again. I hope it's okay. Amon-Ra, if you want to get a little bit more conservative, top 8 receiver in football. He's one of the elites. Hope that's not controversial for anybody like Terry McLaurin, top 15 was a year ago. So were you playing vanilla and say, hey, this is a great opportunity for Storm Duck and Ethan Bonner and X, Y, and Z, all these guys to kind of cut their teeth playing basic vanilla coverage on an island? Or do you say, hey, we want to work on our exotics because it's a joint practice setting against a different team, and we don't want to go out there and do that in the preseason game and put it on tape and then everybody sees what we're trying to do, so we'll do it here in practice, and some of these exotics didn't work well, and you gave up a bunch of completions because your coverage spacing wasn't right because it's all new. Like, I don't know. And I'm not going to sit here and lie to you guys and pretend like I do. So again, I'm not too stressed about the reports on how many times the Detroit Lions scored touchdowns in joint practice and how many touchdowns the Dolphins scored in the red zone period. Did you come out physical and ready to play after somebody straight up called you out? Were you ready to play physical practice? Did you play with pride? Because you can get into scheme and you can get into talent and who's available and who's not. And that's what the rest of the show's for, right? Those were the two things for me that were most important coming into today and will be the same tomorrow. Do you play with pride and physicality? Do you play with intensity? And do you get out of it healthy? That's what I care about right now. And anything else out of that is depending on what side you want to view the glass as. Is the glass half empty or is the glass half full? We'll talk about how you could spin all of this either way next year on Locked On Dolphins. Stick with us. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL predictions. So whether you're calling your shot on MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week one even kicks off, now is your moment. You take a flyer on the Dolphins plus 700. In the AFC East race, you've got New England at plus 550, the Jets at plus 1,800. And you also have the Bills at minus 240. So if any of that is speaking to you, visit the FanDuel app today. Start planning your futures bets now because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. So for the offense, all the reports and indications that I had was the running game was once again steady. But the passing game was very boom or bust, very feast or famine, not consistent as it was against Chicago. Very irregular, not a lot of separation in the routes. Well, Mike McDaniel told everybody before the practice that Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle were going to participate in today's practice. But from the accounts of those in attendance, you could count the number of 7-on-7 and team reps that Jaylen Waddle and Tyreek Hill took on about one hand combined in this practice. So, feast or famine passing game, boom or bust. Achane had some big plays, but the receivers, and it goes back to the same conversation as against Chicago. If you're rolling with Nick Westbrook, Achane, and Malik Washington, and Taj Washington, and D. Eskridge, and these guys are the guys that are taking all the snaps, my glass, half empty, says, yeah, I'd expect you not get a lot of separation. I'd expect you have a lot of having to hold the ball. I would expect you have a lot of pressure as a result, regardless of whether the offensive line blocks or not, because I don't have very high expectations that that core of receivers is going to get open. Right? Now, your glass half empty would say, well, what happens if Tyreek Hill goes nuclear and Jaylen Waddle gets banged up? That you could play with this season. Yeah. Anything could happen, right? The glass half empty says the Dolphins tried to diversify their offense, and in doing so, it's leaned away from what made it initially so impactful, and it's not going well, and that's going to continue to create struggles for the offense for the entirety of 2025. Zach Wilson threw some picks. The glass half empty says backup quarterbacks know better than what it was. Zach Wilson and the rhythm and construct of the play is not necessarily where you want it to be, although it's only August 13th. The glass half full says it's August 13th. One thing that I will say from speaking with a couple of folks in attendance in some way, shape, or form in some capacity, and there's multiple backgrounds of people that I had a chance to speak to this afternoon. Detroit did give you some exotics. I know we mentioned exotics in segment one, and exotic defenses are we show you one thing, we change it up. And I don't think it's coincidence. If you listen to Teron Armstead, when he had his live stream on the set and he gave his breakdown of Chicago joint practices, and I think Teron's set to host Good Morning Football tomorrow. I don't think he was in town for Detroit. He talked about Dennis Allen and the Bears defense gave you some really nuanced, exotic type stuff that, like, when you get into the season, you have to have an answer for to run your plays successfully, right? It sounds like Detroit did some of that as well. And I don't think it's a coincidence that you get into these joint practice settings against somebody else, and you want to take the opportunity to run these against somebody else where it's not going to be put on film for the entire world to see, like what is going to happen on Saturday. Right? So that is important context for me, in addition to who was and was not running the routes at wide receiver. The glass half full says, well, despite not having Tyreek Hill and Jaylen Waddle like the Dolphins did for most of, or for portions of, they did not have Tyreek Hill at all, and they lost Waddle for a portion of practice against Chicago, they continued to have some success running the ball. And that, in and of itself, I think is a glass half full development for the Dolphins offense, because those two define the spacing, right? They define the entire spacing of your offense. And if you can have good, healthy spacing without those two to run the ball and be effective running the football to some degree with consistency, that is a major growth in staying on schedule with your offense on a down by down and possession by possession basis when you get into the regular season, that the Dolphins did not have that luxury of having last year. That's the glass half full. The glass half empty is you went against another aggressive scheme, and your wide receiver 3 and wide receiver 4 and wide receiver 3A and 3B, whoever those are, however you want to choose to classify them, once again struggled to find a winner. And that was what I said coming out of the joint against Chicago was the number one concern. Is my biggest concern out of that practice, beyond you kind of got punked by a team that had a different definition of thud than you did, was, well, somebody has to take the mantle and start to step up. Somebody has to be able to start stepping up when the attention is, when you're left in an isolated matchup from a passing game perspective. And I don't know that we got any closer to that resolution here with this joint practice against Chicago. So that would be the glass half empty side of the passing game on offense. But you did have success with some level of consistency running the ball. The most alarming bit of feedback that I got from the practice from somebody who was there was somebody from Detroit's side of things. I'm going to read what they had to say next. And spoiler alert, it is a glass half empty statement. To get into that next here on Locked on Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. Today's episode of Locked on Dolphins is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. It is the best time of year. NFL kickoff is almost here, and that means fantasy football is back in full swing. This year, Yahoo Fantasy is turning things up with a fantasy football experience like never before. Locked on Dolphins is playing this year on Yahoo Fantasy, and you should too, whether you're a first-timer or a veteran making your millionth league. To celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 big new features over 28 days throughout the month of August. To kick it off, they've dropped Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football on Yahoo, where the lowest scoring team is eliminated each week until there's just one team left standing. With the season around the corner, now is the time to get your league together and try this new mode. Or if you're more into the classics, you could still play in head-to-head private leagues or join a public league. Stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. Let me pull up this message that I had in pertaining to the Dolphins secondary. And it was the Amon-Ra St. Brown show by all reports, where he just, you could have covered him loose. You could have covered him tight. He caught about everything. But here's what my contact had to say. Your outside corners are as bad as I've seen in an NFL practice. And outside of Minka, they're better than the safeties. I was here with a winless team that had Jeff Okudah and a team that had Jeff Okudah as CB1. So not a great day for the secondary, it sounds like. And this is where Amon-Ra and Jared Goff and their chemistry. It was very difficult to stop. You want to look at the glass half empty. This is the bet that you're placing. Now, the glass half full side of this is, well, you're in a setting where you can't contact the quarterback. You can have run-throughs, but plays are still extended if you get pressure. And if you're in a setting where you can't bring the quarterback down to kill the play and you can run by and tag off, but you're still going to get a chance to throw. And if you're given that bit of leeway, you would expect the Dolphins secondary to have a very difficult time covering for an extended period of time. Amon-Ra St. Brown. And that's what you saw. So are you glass half full or glass half empty? Because the glass half empty says, well, Detroit went through like a knife and butter, and you had another edge guy that got banged up in this practice. So now you're without two of the big three, and that's supposed to be the defining variable of the team, even though you don't start the season for about a month. You'd say this is a manifestation of how it can go wrong and what it will look like if it does go wrong. And that's fair. I can't argue that. I'm still holding out hope that the Dolphins do make another investment in corner in some way, shape, or form. And you're running out of time for it. And I understand that. And I also understand that, people have differing opinions on bringing in a veteran, whether it's a late stage guy or a guy with a medical risk, and what that would look like versus the time that they have invested in the young guys that they have in the room. And what's the best pathway for, I get there's a lot of different opinions there. But I think as an organization, the Dolphins would only benefit themselves to protect themselves by giving themselves another option, and give yourself another option that is a more established and proven talent that is capable of competing and playing. Because right now it's a whole lot of questions, and they got a lot of eggs. Here comes a bird joke. They got a lot of eggs in the Storm Duck basket. They're braver than I am. I'll say that, because I would not have that much into the Storm Duck basket. You can get into, again, it's what was the objective of practice. And they have told you outright all summer, and anybody who is willing to listen, a lot of good teams and a lot of teams, regardless of their successes, but a lot of great teams are really focused on the process. I don't know what the process was in building the script for today's practice. Did you want to throw these guys to the wolves against Amon-Ra? Did you want to work on things that are new and tested against an offense, and you weren't spaced correctly, and you went through the growing pains? There's a part of me that would kind of want, personally, to take a young secondary and give them this experience. You need trial by fire, and you need as much of it as you can get if you're going to make this bet that you're going to place. Now, if you come out the other side and the same thing happens to you tomorrow and you're hot knife through butter again, I'd hope you look in the mirror and you ask yourself, who can we sign? Who can we trade for? And I'm not saying trade away a first-round pick or anything like that. But protect yourself. Because if you don't win enough, there's reason to believe that things are going to change with this organization. Sweeping changes. So that's Wednesday's practice. The Dolphins did not score a lot of touchdowns because their passing offense didn't have the two defining players. But the run game was still fairly consistent. The defense did not generate a lot of stops, even though there was some good coverage in Amon-Ra St. Brown on those received balls, and you were in a setting where naturally you're going to get a little bit more leeway to allow a play to work itself out and find completions. Now, the discouraging thing for Miami is when they had the ball, they didn't have that same outcome. But they were also without 10 and 17 for all but like 6 reps in team and 7-on-7. So you can contextualize all of it. It's a matter of what your frame of mind is going into August 13th. Those who choose to say, I want to let it play out, are probably not going to be moved one way or another. And that's kind of where I find myself sitting. But if you're on the pessimistic side of the fence, I'd be willing to bet I know what the comments are going to look like in the YouTube comments about this practice and the reports from this practice. If you're an optimistic fan, I've got a really good feeling I know what the tweets and the replies to those comments are going to look like. Talking about this, it doesn't matter. There's 0-0. It's August 13th. And there's contextual reasons why some of these struggles exist. I take the practice reports, multiple things can be true. I don't think there's any question. If you told me, hey, you're going to go in and your corners are going to play isolated coverage against Amon-Ra for all of practice, and you're going to practice, conversely, without Jaylen Waddle and Tyreek Hill for almost the entirety of practice, except for only a handful of plays, I'd say, oh, they're going to get smoked. Like, in a practice setting especially, that does not lend itself favorably to where the Dolphins are strong and where the Dolphins are weak. So it doesn't surprise me that the tone has been what the tone has been. Now, you'll get a lot of affirmation and confirmation of that from people who believe either side of whether Detroit's going to be amazing or if they think the Dolphins are going to stink or whatever. But hopefully this helped you kind of sort through your feelings. I'm looking for the same thing tomorrow. I don't care how many touchdowns Detroit scores at practice. I don't know how physical you play. I want to know how prepared you were for contact. I want to know that you stood up for your teammates. I want to know that you tried some new things and didn't try to just win the practice. You want to practice trying to win practice and score more points than the other team in practice. Like, you're missing the core foundation of practice, which is to try things and be exposed to new stresses and stressors and apply your technique and fundamentals and learn how to do things based on different looks and different tempos of routes and different shell rotations on the back end or different five-man pressures and how to pass things. Like, that's all. It's the exposure to those things that you can then apply moving forward with your game. I'd rather take one on the nose on Wednesday, August 13th than a weekend in mid-October any day of the week, any day of the year. That's the point. Now, would you like to roll in and steamroll every team you play? Sure. Dolphins aren't giving us that luxury. So it is what it is. That's going to do it for me here today on Locked On Dolphins. I'm out of here. Appreciate you guys as always for checking out the show. Make it a great rest of your Wednesday. I'll be back to talk to you all again tomorrow. I have some thoughts on Achane and his future outlook, his crystal ball in the midst of one of the contracts that was signed today. Planning on getting into that a little bit in addition to whatever else comes our way tomorrow on Locked On Dolphins. Hope to see you then. Go Fins.